We can now bring in our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Philip, good afternoon. The fact that these grain shipments have been taking place from Ukraine for the past few weeks now, it's a victory for the UN, but it's also a bigger victory for the Turkish president.
Certainly is a very positive step forward, and I think a calming factor for many countries which were really fearing famine and food shortages, and the fact that there are some grain shipments now leaving Ukraine is all good and should be, hopefully, in the eyes of Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, stepped up as far as possible. Now, he's due to go to Odessa tomorrow after the meeting today with Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Volodymyr Zelenskiy to see with his own eyes how this agreement is carrying on. It was Antonio Guterres who put forward this plan to the Russians and to the Ukrainians. So I think symbolically to see him there inspecting what's going on will come as a huge relief to many of the nations which are dependent on grain from Ukraine. There are several other issues at stake here, though. I think the main one being that there are thousands of tons of grain leaving the country, but they want to have millions of tons. 22 million tons was the original amount, which was agreed upon back on the 22nd of July with the signing of that agreement. Well, we're not up to that yet. And I think part of the negotiations today with the Turks and with the Ukrainians will be on enlarging the humanitarian corridor to let those grain shipments out more quickly and larger ships, and ensuring the safety of these foreign vessels that will be going into these ports in Ukraine to retrieve these shipments and make sure that they're escorted out safely, because that will encourage others, I think, to come forward and to do the same thing. So a symbolic sign today that things are going in the right direction, but still quite a lot to be done. But at least some shipments are coming out of Ukraine, and that is certainly a big relief to many countries which are dependent on Ukrainian grain.
Indeed. I want to talk about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because we have Russia today that's warning that Ukraine is planning a provocation at the nuclear power plant, something Kyiv said is simply absurd.
Well, I think you have to split this into different sectors. The first one is that, remember, Russia is basically appealing and talking to a domestic audience which doesn't know what's going on, which believes this is still a special military operation. Russia is saying that they are occupying the Zaporizhzhia base because they are protecting it against shelling by Ukraine. Russia can't admit to shelling it itself, because that would be seen by the international community as something putting in danger not only Ukraine but much of Western Europe if there is a nuclear spill. So the easy thing to do is to point the finger at Ukraine and say, we are here to protect the site and to make sure that there are no attacks here. And Russia's also said that it's not deploying any heavy military or artillery equipment around that area too. But from the Ukrainian point of view, they are saying, well, what we want is for international inspectors to go in, inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency. That is obviously one of the key discussion points which will be happening in these talks today with Recep Tayyip Erdogan and also Antonio Guterres. The Ukrainians have said they are willing to let those inspectors go in, but the problem is that the Russians, which occupy the site, have to agree to that, and Russia so far hasn't agreed, because it will obviously know that if the inspectors do go in, they risk pointing the finger at Russia and blaming Russia for these shelling attacks. So it's a standoff between both sides.
Philip, thank you very much for that. Philip Turle there.